Welcome back to A People's Guide to Publishing. I'm Joe Beal, the founder and CEO of Microcosm Publishing and Distribution. I'm also the author of A People's Guide to Publishing, which distills what I've learned from selling millions of books over the past 25 years.
I'm Ellie Blue. I'm the editorial and marketing director here at Microcosm. We are an independent mid-list publisher based in Portland, Oregon. We have 14 employees, over 650 titles in print with 20 to 40 new books per year, and we distribute thousands of titles from other publishers.
We started this podcast so that we can share what we've learned with newer publishers so that you can learn from our mistakes.
Or perhaps you just want to better understand the publishing industry.
This week, we are going to talk about influences, heroes, and inspirations, and, things to lean into, as metaphorically.
Joe, who has inspired you the most?
It's a good, when I was younger, there's a thing in punk rock where you kill your idols and you kind of sort of don't do that, and I think I resisted that for a long time. And then part of that is just people have this amazing tendency when you build them up into something that they are not, that they let you down. But later in adulthood, I want to say in my 30s or even 40s, I discovered Barbara Corcoran through an interview with her. And I had never watched, apparently she is a host on a show called Shark Tank that I have still never seen, but I feel like it maybe doesn't interest me as much, because Barbara Corcoran was a realtor in New York City in the 1970s, which, those of you familiar with New York City would call the dark times. And, and comes from very little, she had 10 siblings and, they grew up in abject poverty, and and then she worked as a waitress, and she talks a lot about how various aspects of her life taught her lessons for moguling in a when she had access to greater amounts of capital and opportunity. This mostly having to do with sketchy, short-lived boyfriends in her life, and then having to prove their low expectations of her wrong. All of which I can relate with so much. But the biggest lesson, of course, is the one that, she said basically having no expectations on her as a child led to having no pressure on her as an adult to do anything, and not having to feel like she's having to live up to her parents or what they wanted of her. Who have been your idols, inspirations, and influences?
Well, I would say the answer is probably the same now as it was when I was 14 years old.
Dang, that's pretty cool.
Patti Smith. Patti Smith is amazing. And I don't know if I ever could have put words to it. Her music really inspired me when I was a kid. But reading her books recently, which are amazing books, she's an incredible writer, first of all, inspired me with the reality that she, can do anything. She's a genius, but also, the way that she lives her life so unapologetically and so not as a business person has inspired me in business more than any business influence, I guess. She really she writes in her book M Train about how she wanted to open a coffee shop in New York City, so she rented a commercial space for $10,000 a month or something, and then she just sat there and she really enjoyed the light, and she enjoyed sitting at the table and imagining and dreaming and just having these unbelievable flights of fancy about the romantic life that could occur in a coffee shop. And then after a few months she ran out of money and gave it up and went on tour so she could earn more money to buy a house in the Rockaways that was then immediately destroyed by Hurricane Sandy. But she didn't seem to have regrets about any of these things, or shame, or a sense even that she had failed. It seemed like that was she really got what she wanted out of all of these things, and then she wrote a beautiful book about them. And that seems to be just how she's lived her life, with just this really pure sense of pursuing her art in a way that doesn't make her didactic.
Yeah.
Or alienate her from other people, but the opposite, which I'm just how do you capture that? How do you do that, Patti Smith? I'll forever be trying to be like you.
And she's like chasing her values perpetually. She's never like getting, and that's all the business advice I've ever seen from Patti Smith is she's like, people will remember the worst things you've done, so don't do anything that you'll regret later.
Easier said than done.
So why is it important to have these inspirations?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, I didn't come from punk, so I never had the sort of kill your idols values imposed on me, but I always was very skeptical and would do that of my own volition. But, and I remember even when I was younger being like, I don't really admire anybody. Like, people in my life I would admire for this and that, but like, I never really had like role models. But now at this point in my life, I feel like it is really helpful, partly just as like a, what would Patti Smith do? Mm-hmm. Or what would this other person do? But partly also just as like a reminder of, not even somebody I want to be like, but just as a reminder of the like many different ways to do things, as a reminder to stay flexible, and that people have done all sorts of preposterous things and succeeded.
Right. And that's, and it's interesting because the more I study other people's stories, even like organizations or that seem so successful and so larger than life to me, mostly what they rehash is their biggest mistakes and their biggest hurdles, failures, difficulties, and how they had to overcome them. And that, I feel like that is almost the most important thing to learn from, is that even the people that you think of as so successful had really comedic failures in their past. You
turned me on to the How I Built This podcast, mm-hmm. which I really love for that reason, because, not everybody has an inspirational story and not everybody has a great story, but, like, if you're looking for role models or even just kind of, like, other people's examples to test your thoughts and ideas and catastrophizing against, that's a really good source for it.
They have a book now, too, in theory. In theory, exciting. We have it. I haven't seen it, but...
We have so many books.
So many books. But that, I guess those kinds of things, even if they're not inspiring, they can still be interesting. I don't know. And then there were, like, book publishers that I found interesting when I was younger, but more so, like yourself, there were book publishers that I really wanted to find interesting, and then I just couldn't really get gung-ho about them, because nothing was ever sort of quite right for me. I'm a bit of a unique flower.
I was obsessed with the Whole Earth catalog. Mm-hmm. I bought their very last one they published in the 90s, and I found it on the clearance shelf at Barnes & Noble when I was a teenager in suburban Connecticut. And Barnes & Noble, it serves a purpose. Mm-hmm. And that was how I learned about zines and became obsessed with zines, and started writing my own. But I also, like, still to this day, like, I think of that format of, like, kind of recommending a practical product and telling you where to get it and showing you an excerpt from it and having commentary about it, like that. And also, like, having weird essays and stories and art interspersed throughout. Like, that still is sort of, like, the holy grail for me in terms of, like, how I would like my information delivered. Mm-hmm. The internet does a pretty good job of it.
Right, yes. It is similar in that way.
Though, the more, like, the internet, you kind of have to, like, follow these bunny trails, whereas the Whole Earth catalog was a little more curated.
Right. And you don't have to, like, fact-check thoroughly or wonder what is parody or...
Yeah, it was a little bit more journalistic. Maybe mm-hmm. not totally...
Right.
It showed a point of view, though, which I also liked, that you could, like, show a point of view through displaying different information.
Yeah. And I think, bringing it back to Barbara Corcoran, I feel like the thing that is most interesting about her is that it doesn't seem, and correct me if I'm wrong, Barbara, please, I would love you to get in touch with me, it doesn't seem like the pursuit of money or accumulation of wealth is the point so much as it is like the game, the hunt, like enjoying the process, which, like, I relate with that so thoroughly. Like, I just, it's like I am much happier at a subsistence level than I am at a accumulation level, I
think we found the one thing that Barbara Corcoran and Patti Smith have in common. Mm-hmm. It's all about the process.
And on that note, we'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us once again.
Please send your questions to podcast@microcosmpublishing.com so we can answer them on future episodes.
And please give us 5 stars on iTunes and everywhere else that podcasts are reviewed.
You can find us on the internet at microcosm.pub.
On Twitter at microcosm.
on Facebook at Microcosm Publishing,
on Instagram at microcosm_pub.
and here in Portland, Oregon on North Williams Avenue.
Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful week.